Okay, once again, welcome to all those who are attending our fifth in the series of 6 webinars regarding advancing recovery. This is a webinar that is focusing on how we support individuals to gain the lives of meaning beyond the formal systems of care. You're going to see many of the components presented today that you've heard before about how they start to come together as a systematic whole. Rick Goscha is once again our faculty expert. I'm not going to reintroduce him. For those that might be listening in for the first time, we do have some information about Rick's background, but for those that have been with us all along, you've come to know Rick quite well. We're very excited that he is part of our group. I am a moderator and associate director with CIBHS, and Sharon Wright is our coordinator behind the scenes, so if there's any questions about your technology, please chat to Sharon or email to her. She's the one with whom you've probably interacted via email. Next slide. We do have, once again, the opportunity to get CEUs, or continuing education credits. Once again, the instructions here are that you submit your name and email address. If you're wanting to seek the CEs, you'll receive a packet from us in the mail. If there's a team of you that are sitting in a room, we need to make sure that everybody who's in the room that wants CEs is included in the listing in the question box on the menu screen associated with the GoToWebinar technology. So you can see the question box here. You do need to attend the entire session, of course. Our system can track who's on the, remains online throughout. We're obligated to track that. Once you've given us your name, completed the session, we will get the CE packet out to you, which you'll then submit back to us. In the past, we've been a bit slow about this, but we have staffed up our continuing education group, and so we should be faster in the future and for this go around to get the packet out to you. Next slide. So here's an agenda, our agenda for session 5. After these introductions, we're going to talk a bit about the strengths model orientation scale again, because we're going to bring great focus to this during session 6. We'll do a check-in and review on shared decision-making, especially if some folks have some questions or would like to talk a little bit with Rick about what it's like to have tried it and what the experience taught you or made you wonder about. And then we're going to shift into our new content, which is this big picture view of how do we help folks live the life outside of our walls and what we do for them within our formal system. And that's going to introduce a focus on a new way to think about what we do for folks, and that is thinking of their anchors and niches. And finally, we'll wrap up with a pretty in-depth demonstration and discussion of a group supervision process attached to the strengths model that's very straightforward and easy to do, fun to do, and we'll even be showing you a bit of a video about how that works. And then we'll summarize and wrap up. So that'll take us to 1:30. So reminding you about the strengths model practice and the orientation scale. Here's the scale. You've seen it many times, 5 items, and in general, you as an individual and then as a team would score what level you're in, and then within each level, what increment, numerical increment best fits your score. We want you to go ahead and do individual scores, and then if you're functioning as a team, go ahead and submit those. And then we'll be sending you, and I'll be showing you later a SurveyMonkey where you can send us your scores. So we will remind you of those scores. Oh, and here's our background about Rick. I'm not going to go through it again other than to say that as you've come to know him, he has really done the full spectrum of services and management leadership in this arena of advancing recovery practices and how we serve folks who have our needs. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Very good. Thanks, Karen. Just want to start off by revisiting our last webinar, just really briefly on shared decision-making. In our last session, we discussed shared decision-making as a key component of recovery-oriented practice. And so ideally, shared decision-making helps people with serious mental illness or anybody with any type of healthcare condition move from passive recipients of service to being more active participants in their own health and wellness. But most clients have not experienced shared decision-making within most mental health systems. So a move to shared decision-making is really going to require us to be extremely attuned to how decisions are made with the people that we serve, in addition to requiring a heightened awareness of people's values, their preferences, and a respect for choice and autonomy. So before we went on, I just wanted to see if there was any questions or feedback that people have from our last session.
So Rick, we'll give folks time to type in a question into the question box or raise their hand.
Okay.
Okay, I don't think we see any new questions coming in, so why don't we carry on?
All right, sounds good. Today we're going to talk about helping people live lives of meaning and purpose beyond our formal mental health services. When I was a young case manager, the mental health organization that I worked in seemed so large and daunting to me. And I was still learning my own skills, and I felt caught between two seeming realities. And one of those was that the people our organization served had very immense needs, and not just related to mental illness, but also related to poverty, little social support, addictions, trauma, etc. And secondly, the organization I worked for had immense needs, and that equated to things like productivity standards, paperwork, meetings, training requirements, policies ad nauseum, etc. And even though I was called a community case manager when I first got started in this field, this was really often relegated to driving between people's apartments, entitlement offices, going to social service organizations, food pantries, doctor's offices, the mental health center. And it really didn't seem like there was time to do much beyond meeting people's immediate needs and working through crises. So some of this could be attributed to my own inexperience at the time, but I also worked for an organization that did very little to teach me any different. Because I was seeing people billing, following procedure and protocol, and not letting crises get out of hand, I was pretty much left alone to do my work. So the strengths model, when I was first introduced to it, it really required me to look at this phenomena much differently. And it was a struggle blending all these disparate agendas as a direct service provider. But as I moved into positions like a program manager and then an executive director, it became easier for me to see how this messy, tangled web of organizational machinery had become and how necessary it was to shift the organizational focus to truly create an environment for recovery-oriented practice to thrive. So the definition, I've showed this slide before, the definition of the recovery in the strengths model is a life worth living beyond the mental health system that brings meaning, purpose, and a positive sense of self-identity. And now while that's a very simple thing to say, it's not the easiest thing to attain because there's so many complex factors that work against it. But if we do not set it out there prominently as a primary focus of our mental health systems, then we're never going to be able to attain it. But it needs to be a vision held not only at the organizational level, but then also embedded within the approaches of every single worker and every single client. So if we're going to help people then move past our systems of care, then we're going to need to look very closely at the goals we're working on with clients. There's always going to be basic and immediate needs that need to be taken care of. There's always going to be the occasional crises that needs quick attention. But if we look at the goals on our treatment plans, are they goals that perpetuate a person's attachment to the system, or do they extend the person beyond our system of care? So when I reviewed goals on people's strengths assessments, their treatment plans, or a personal recovery plan, I want the wording of that goal to evoke some passion, and not just for the perspective of the client, but also from that worker. We're looking for goals that are worth fighting for. So setting the focus on passionate goals, this doesn't mean, and we've said this before in the other webinars, is that it does not mean that we ignore the barriers, the challenges, and the obstacles that people face when they're working to achieve these goals. But we need to be able to put problems in their place and then specifically target areas that are impeding their ability to achieve meaningful and important goals in the community. And just because we define something as a problem does not mean it needs to be an area of focus for someone to further their recovery. So anytime, that's why in the second session we focus so much on the strengths assessment and really starting to figure out, in a sense, how people, in a sense, looked at their lives, how they viewed recovery, before we even started talking about the interventions that we were going to provide. So if we're going to target those areas then that are impeding people from being able to be successful in the community, then we need to use interventions that are effective at removing these barriers. And then, so if we come down to the bottom line of reading a series of notes from any worker that you have, from a strengths-based, recovery-oriented practitioner, you should see this evolving storyline revealed that shows constant efforts to understand, identify, and work towards a life of meaning and purpose for the person. So no matter how messy that journey is at times, and as you're reading those notes, there's one step forward, two steps back, etc., you should still see a thread of creativity and curiosity, patience, and determination on the part of the worker that weaves through the midst of all of that. So before we start talking about helping people to build or recover a life worth living that's apart from our systems of care, then we have to really talk a little bit about the things people are recovering from that extends well beyond simply mental illness. In fact, it's not always the symptoms of mental illness which disable the people we serve the most, but actually a whole host of other complex and often interwoven realities. Most clients that come to us or intersect with our systems, they come with much more than just mental illness. And this also then puts people in a vulnerable position to become entrapped within the systems of care that are designed to help them. So many people, when entering our system, they can initially experience sometimes even very intense internal states of being overwhelmed, confused, unsafe, helpless, or even hopeless. And many people are desperate to find a respite, some semblance of stability, even if that is only temporary. So this is going to lead us as a backdrop then to some themes that are going to be very prominent in today's webinar, and that's anchors and niches. And I don't know how you pronounce that. There's like 3 different ways that you can say that. It's, some people say niches, some people say niches. There was another third way. But however you pronounce that, you just hear that in your mind. But I've always pronounced it niches, and so that's what I'm going to go with. But we're going to see that a person's recovery journey can be significantly affected by the location and the strength of various anchors in their lives. And what I'm going to argue is that having substantial key aspects of a person's life firmly anchored within our systems of care can be a major obstacle to helping people successfully move past the services that we provide. So what's an anchor? All of us can envision, visualize, the role of a ship's anchor and the role that plays. It serves to keep a ship from drifting due to, from the wind, the current. And during a storm, it becomes very critical to avoid the ship drifting then out into like more treacherous waters or being tossed against the rocky shoreline. And in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, one definition is simply something that serves to hold an object firmly. And so I'm going to use this metaphor in the context of our own lives. And we can all identify multiple anchors that keep us grounded, that keeps us connected, provides safety and security for us, and that provide respite even when needed. Some of the anchors that we have in our own lives are more stable than others. Some of those anchors will grow stronger over time. And even some anchors that we may at one time consider to be strong prove to be weaker than we realized. But who we are and how we view ourselves is often associated with these anchors. So for me as a husband and a father of 4 kids, my family becomes not only a place where a good portion of my life is anchored, but it also defines who I am. And a good portion of my self-worth is highly intertwined within my role as a husband and a father. And the same could be said of my work. But between my family and my work, a significant amount of meaning, purpose, and identity is derived. So then you take these anchors of where I'm anchored in my life, and these anchors exist within environmental spaces, and here I use the term niches. And no matter what the size of our community is, we typically only occupy a limited amount of space available within that community. So when all of us woke up this morning in our home space, you know, maybe we're coming into work, we stopped to get a coffee as part of our daily routine. We came into work, maybe we go out to lunch, return to work, and then we return home at the end of the day. You know, some of us tonight may go out to some kind of social gathering, some of us may go out and do exercise, do something recreational, attend something our kids are involved in, etc., etc. But these spaces exist in a relatively small portion of our community. And being creatures of habit, we often return to these same niches week after week. And not all niches are equal. And one person's positive experience of a particular niche can be a negative experience to another. But these niches are very important because the quality of a person's life is largely determined by the quality of the niches that they occupy. So I'm going to talk about 2 niches at the extremes, and that's entrapping niches and enabling niches. Though few of us are actually ever really completely in an entrapping niche or completely in an enabling niche. And I'm using this term enabling. I don't know what your reaction is to hearing it, but you know, there was a time that the word to enable was actually a good word. You know, it was a time when to enable someone to do something was a positive thing. And unfortunately now it's seen as a completely dirty word. You know, but the definition was, and it still is, to make able to do something or to be something, to make something possible. So I'm going to use that word in that context so that when you hear that, I'm speaking that as kind of the parallel, or that's not the parallel, it's the other side of a continuum from of an entrapping niches. So let's compare these 2 niches, and let's look at the extremes so that we can recognize these 2 types of niches. So entrapping niches are very highly stigmatized, or they can be highly stigmatizing, and also confirm or reinforce negative views that people hold of themselves. But if we go to the other side with enabling niches, you know, these are ones where they're much less stigmatizing or not stigmatizing at all, and that people use for validation and support, etc. You know, a group of people lined up at a homeless shelter are viewed differently than a group of hikers. A family can either be an entrapping or enabling niche. A person's in an entrapping niche, or like a person's family system was an entrapping niche, a person's shortcomings and mistakes are magnified, whereas in an enabling niche, people's strengths are held up and their worth is self-validated. In the people that are caught in entrapped niches or entrapping niches are often totally defined by their social category. And the possibility that the person may have aspirations or attributes that are apart from a category is often not considered. So to an outsider, a person can be viewed as just an addict or a crazy person, a bag lady, etc. Where in enabling niches, a person is not defined by their category, and it's automatically assumed that they have aspirations and attributes that extend beyond that at any one point in time. So as you listen to me here on this webinar, most of you probably assume that I have a life that's beyond this webinar, or at least I hope I do. In entrapping niches, there's no graduations. There's no pride in meeting milestones. You know, there's no accolades that are given to a person who completes 1,000 hours of groups in a psychosocial program. You know, but 60 to 80 hours at a community college is seen as a major achievement. You know, bottom line, that the people most marginalized in our society are caught in entrapping niches, including people with serious mental illnesses. And once isolated in these types of niches, the availability of resources and mechanisms of escape become very sparse. And in fact, many social, political, economic, even professional processes within our own systems are in place that can sometimes make escape virtually impossible for some people. So when we start looking at our own systems of care, we need to take a good critical look at the extent of our programs and our practices either reinforce or draw people into entrapping niches, or are designed to help people identify, connect, and thrive within enabling niches. So as we talk about mental health systems and the community going forward, I want to be very clear that everything is not mental health bad, community good. And that would just be way too reductionary. Entrapping and enabling niches exist in both mental health systems and the community. But I want to further your awareness and ability to critically think about the niches the people that we serve occupy, including our own systems. Go back. Let me return just real briefly back to my current anchors and niches, just to kind of get a little bit better visualization of what this is, and then we're going to start making some applications to people that we serve. You know, when I think about the size of the community that I live in right now, Lawrence, Kansas, it's about 100,000 people. The extent and range of niches are really rather small, but for me, this is my comfort zone. Now, I have the opportunity to broaden my social niches if I want to, or any niches that I occupy. But often either I don't feel comfortable to be myself within those other niches, or I don't perceive that niche to be a particularly welcoming environment for me. The point here is that all of our niches offer us something. So there's these active ingredients that are important to us that are anchored inside of these niches. So for me, as I kind of talked about a few slides before, my family and work, and you see that, you know, I drive meaning and purpose, my identity, who I am, a good portion of the emotional support that I have, social support, the learning that I generate, and work does some of the same things, you know, besides providing financial stability, a daytime social network. Once again, my meaning and purpose and identity and learning are all kind of intertwined in there. And then the few things that these two niches don't provide for me, I find in other positive enabling niches, which would include like the social work of my neighborhood and some recreational activities that I enjoy. Let me go back on that. So there's multiple aspects of our lives that we anchor, you know, anyone, whether we're talking about ourselves, whether we're talking about the people that we serve. And for most of us, when we look at all these different kinds of categories, they're usually scattered over multiple niches. But sometimes we can find ourselves with all or the majority of our anchors in just, you know, a very few, even one or two niches. And while this isn't necessarily bad, it can have extremely negative consequences if these niches are entrapping. So for some of us, our ability to move between niches fairly easily keeps us from remaining in an entrapping niche for very long once we identify it. And it's often the social capital that we possess that allows us to be able to do this. So I mean, for many of you, maybe social capital is a new term. It's one that I picked up in a sociology class I took probably about 20 years ago. But social capital can be, it can be actual resources, but it can also be status, class, the experiences that we accumulate over our life, the connections that we have in our life or that we've had in the past. And some of the social capital that we currently have, we didn't earn, we inherited. So an example is I was born a white male, which by itself affords me some unearned privilege. Some of us were born into middle-class families or even affluent families. Some of us inherited more socially defined beauty than others. Some of the social capital that we have, we accumulate over time. Some of us, actually probably all of us, have some unique talents and skills. Some of us have an extensive knowledge base in one or two areas. Some of us happen to have friends who are well connected, which is why I put up that phrase right there that it's sometimes not what you know but who you know. But social capital can give us mobility, and the lack of social capital can make mobility between niches very difficult. And even when we're using a strengths assessment and looking at maybe some of the social capital that a person does possess, some people don't even recognize or even know how to use the social capital they have. When I was a supervisor, but even more so as a program manager, I used to tell people who were hired by an organization that for some people that you work with, you may be the most important piece of social capital that they possess. And so use that privilege to help create opportunities to make sure you're not the only piece of social capital that that person possesses. So let's turn to the people that we serve now with a little bit of a backdrop on that. If we're going to help people move beyond the mental health system, we need to take inventory of where their anchors are located. Are they grounded within our system or within more natural community settings? Are these anchors embedded within niches that are enabling or in niches that are entrapping? And how stable are these anchors for the person? So let's look at the anchors for Elizabeth, who we introduced in our very first webinar. Elizabeth, as you recall, had been in mental health services for quite a while before her recovery journey really took off. And Elizabeth was fairly isolated from the community at one point, and pretty much all of her anchors were located within her family niche and also the niche of the mental health system. So when you see up there, within, and I just put in just a few of those categories of where people might have various aspects of their life anchored. But if we look at Elizabeth's identity, social, recreational, and safety for just a few, you see lots of formal services and systems of care that are embedded within there. And you can see that it's kind of very limited. But there was also, and you can see it up there on the very top by identity, is that there was also an abstract niche that was present that held a lot of Elizabeth's anchors, and that was her illness. So a lot of how Elizabeth identified herself was through the lens of illness, which became an entrapping niche for her in and of itself. So when we think about, where people can sometimes get entrapped, I mean, it could be within entrapping families. Of course, families could also be enabling, but the same thing with like systems of care, but even sometimes a person's identity being wrapped around with illness is very hard for people to break through and can be a barrier for them being able to move forward in their recovery and to have more of a substantial part of their life in the community. So Elizabeth, as we talked about in that very first webinar, had a very difficult time moving away from mental health, the mental health system, because most of her anchors were located within it. And even though she had a love-hate relationship with the people and the services that she received, it still provided the most stability that she knew, and probably actually knew throughout her life. But probably the most entrenched anchor was actually the relationship that she had with her case manager. And this was quite an eye-opening experience when the case manager realized that one of the main reasons that Elizabeth remained in mental health was because she was the anchor within the niche of her own system. So little did the case manager realize that discussing recovery then as this life of meaning and purpose outside of the system was actually in direct opposition to what Elizabeth was trying to maintain. So she would set goals to basically stay engaged in a relationship with her worker, but actually achieving those goals outside the mental health system was not necessarily something that she wanted to complete, to follow through with. So recovery was actually seen for her as a threat to her stability. So there are a lot of people that, if they, in a sense, start to resign over their lives to the mental health system, and, I'm not saying that every person that we work with does this, but doing that can become a very place of safety and comfort for people. So actually taking a step of thinking about moving beyond systems of care is very unsettling for a lot of people. So as we're going to talk about a little bit more, it takes lots of patience and stuff for us to kind of move forward in this. Now I should say Elizabeth's case manager was a very good-hearted, well-intentioned person, but once she started looking at the role that she was playing in Elizabeth's life, this led her to realize that she'd also become the primary anchor for several other clients that she was working with. So based on the case manager's awareness of this, she began to also then make her own shifts in terms of how she viewed her role as a service provider, and as you know, the end of the story on that, she was extremely instrumental in helping Elizabeth move forward. So Elizabeth's journey forward in her recovery, though, it was a very slow process. And I can't remember exactly on the slides there, but from the very first one, but I think it was over a period of like 6 years from when she was kind of introduced to the term, kind of had to think about it, before a lot of her anchors started shifting to where you see them on that right part of the screen. Getting the apartment for her was the quickest part, because this was something that Elizabeth desired, and it wasn't seen as a threat to maintaining a relationship with her worker. The other things actually naturally evolved over time, and weren't necessarily things that you completely planned on. So just getting the apartment, it wasn't that they found an apartment that just happened to have this great neighbor that lived right across the way, but in this case, that is how it worked out. So like the neighbor that she enjoyed and started actually doing more things with, getting a dog, finding a church where she was accepted, etc., etc. This evolved over 6 years. But what helped was the case manager understanding anchors and niches and the importance of looking for opportunities for these to shift. So before I go on, I just want to stop and see if there's any questions, reactions. I feel like I've thrown a lot of stuff out there to you, so I just want to stop before I keep talking to myself.
So Rick, I'm going to monitor the questions being submitted and or if there are any hands raised.
Okay. I'll take any comments.
Yes, none have come through, but we would love to hear reactions. We'll take a minute here to hear from folks. Okay, well, Rick, I think maybe we don't have any questions.
Well, let me go a little bit.
Oh, here we go. Here's a question that's coming in.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
It says, it really sounds like codependency issues. I work in dual diagnosis. That's from Claire Friedman. Claire, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and then you can choose to speak up if you want.
Oh, hi.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking about how the social worker was, trapped in being the person who was the solution, not knowing it, but feeling, not realizing that she was in that dynamic, and then taking herself out of the equation. So I was just sort of making that parallel that it's an issue of codependency, which often comes in the helping professions.
Yeah, it's her first, when we do some implementation work around the strengths model, we spend a lot of time with workers and kind of helping them, observing them out in the field, helping them, think through different things. And one of her first reactions when she saw this, and actually even one of her coworkers started thinking the same thing, was that we've got to like stop doing some of these things, but almost like to the extreme knee-jerk reaction. And I think that probably wouldn't have been productive for her then to, in a sense, just to completely back away. But having that awareness really allowed her to see how the dynamics that that was going on was actually contributing to her actually feeling even more overwhelmed in her work. You know, and some of these things were things that were, were actually beneficial to her. I mean, people, when they come into this work, they want to make a difference. And, when you're having people that you're successfully able to help in certain areas, it can feel really good. But when you start really looking at the overall course of some of these things, that you can see that people rarely start to move away from us, which was really the intention all along, was to help people build on natural supports out in the community when those are there.
So Rick, there's a question I think that's quite related to this. It comes from David Zarnacki, and David, I'm sorry if I don't have your name pronounced correctly, but his question was, when clients develop a support system within the clinic, is this seen as entrapment? And David, I'll take you off mute in case you want to have a bit more questions with Rick.
Well, I'll and then you can come back in, is that, that's why I don't think necessarily that things that go on in a mental health center have to be entrapping, but they can be. I always, some of the best references for me is always being a parent with 4 kids, and there's a lot of supports that I provide to my kids over the years. But what you would hope is that the kids don't necessarily feel completely entrapped in it, that there's always a reason why you might be doing something. And the enabling a niche is really helping the people broaden out to create opportunities. But yeah, there's going to be times that the supports within the mental health system are extremely critical for people. There's going to be some people that they already have a large portion of their lives already in the community, that we then, in a sense, uproot those and pull those into the mental health system, and those I think can be very entrapping. But we do have sometimes people that are very disconnected from the community, and so that we do have to start sometimes inward before we work outward. I think a lot of it's being conscious of what are we doing and why are we doing it? What is the purpose? What's the goal? If we can answer some of those questions, I think that helps us from creating entrapping niches. But you can see,
so
like,
David, David, real quick, can you use your microphone? Do you have any further questions or wonderings for Rick? Okay, and Rick, before you go on, we also have a question from Ann Hull. I am not entirely clear on the difference between anchors and niches. Is the anchor the external resource and the niche an internal role that the person believes is who they are?
I'm not really sure either. I just kind of I've been playing around with a lot of these concepts, but I'll tell you how I kind of see it. When I think of the niche, I think of more of a larger environmental space. And then I think sometimes of the anchor is like what we put inside of it. So if I go back to those things that, we have, like things like our identity. Where is our anchor? Where is our identity anchored? So I see those going in certain types of niches, and the quality of that niche really starts to define that identity. So I think there's some parts of it that I think can be used interchangeably, and I almost find myself doing the exact same thing. But visually, what I kind of always see is that the niche is what you're trying to look for. It's where you're trying to find places in the community where the client has to change little and the environment has to change really little. But it's thinking about is that what aspects of a person's life become anchored there. There's so many people that, have all of the aspects of their life anchored within our system. So, I mean, they may have their housing, their financial stability, their social, everything. You put all those things together, and that creates an environment where people can become very entrapped in it.
So, Anne, I took you off mute. Anything else you want to ask Rick about this? Okay. And then Krista Underwood has another question. What are some ways to change this dynamic of dependency and entrapping niche, especially in a situation when it is established between the client and the provider, or even the system as a whole, and the client is afraid to venture beyond, or the clinician is afraid of the consequences of doing so.
Right. Let me hold some of that. Some of the slides that I have coming up here might start to address that, and if they don't, let's come back and revisit that. But I think there are some concrete things that we can do. So let me go on, if you allow me the liberty of doing that, and then we'll see if that does it.
There's one more question that maybe you could just weave into what you say from here forward.
Okay.
And it's the new anchors for Elizabeth seem to be consistently the same. Though they look solid, I wonder if this can lead to stagnation. I'm picking up from your explanation that the process of finding these niches and anchors is what the person benefits from. That this is a dynamic process which makes the person's life worth living, and that comes from Anna Krochmo.
Yeah. You know, I think it is. You know, we're dynamic individuals that we're constantly evolving, and I think stagnation can occur. It can occur within any of our lives, and you know, sometimes we look for other areas. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is one thing for us to think about. You know, in terms of when we're helping people move beyond the system, that just because we connect a person to a community setting, you know, getting them an apartment, and maybe they establish one friend, we can be lulled into thinking is that, okay, we've done it. You know, we've got some anchors for this person. It seems very stable, but that doesn't mean that's always going to be stable. It doesn't mean. So you know, that's why I think it's always important. That it's more than just hooking people up to resources. It's also helping the people that we work think about their lives and think about how they are able to, in a sense, build and grow on things. Those are great skills, I think, that I think are very important to teach, because their lives are going to change, and they're going to change constantly. So let me go into, you know, how can we identify anchors? And you know, there's lots of ways that you can do things like this. But since we're talking about the strengths model, I'm going to use those things. And the strengths assessment specifically is a tool that was designed to help with that. So when done well, you're not only going to see the placement of people's anchors, but you're also going to see discrepancies between what people are actually seeking and what their niche actually provides. So one of the first steps, I think, in this is really starting to look at becoming aware of it. So if we're kind of going to this thing about, you know, how do we help people not get into this trap? You know, there's a few things that we're going to have to think about. One is that there are big differences sometimes, or actually just not sometimes, there really is, between people that have been in our systems for 10 and 15 years or longer and the person that's the next new person that comes into our system. And I think when I think of strengths model practice, you know, we always have to think about that next person that we're going to probably see next week. When we look at a person that's been in our system of care for, say, 15, 20 years, you know, they may have substantial anchors within our system that's going to be very hard to uproot. So sometimes it's just identifying, but not necessarily putting the pressure that we have to make movement on that. So if you look at the highlighted areas, I'm using Jacob's strengths assessment, who we introduced in the third webinar. And if you look at the highlighted areas on the far left of Jacob's strengths assessment, you'll see some prominent anchors that bring meaning, purpose, and identity to Jacob. Some of these are in the way of people, like his partner Jeffrey, his mom, and his brother's family. But also his art and going to the park or the zoo. So if you looked only at this part of the strengths assessment, you could surmise that you know, Jacob's not doing all that bad. In terms of family support, Jacob had stronger ties that some other people that we work with might not have. But really outside family and art, which he wasn't really heavily connected to it at the very beginning part of his recovery journey, the majority of his anchors were still within the mental health system. So the middle column is actually very telling. So, you know, think about all those things in the middle. So, I mean, we have these things that that Jacob already has in his life, and I think it's important, I think, to really understand the importance of these things, how strong these things are, what roles they currently play in his life. But that middle column of doing a strengths assessment with Jacob really revealed a lot. It shows it's how Jacob defines a life worth living. So a place with Jeffrey, this is how he envisions it. And that place is located close to a bus line, a coffee shop, which he liked to drink coffee, getting a car, having a cat or two, going to community college. And so as you kind of look at this, what you see is that he has the niches that he has that actually are fairly strong, that are strengths for him. But there's a lot of these things that he desires in his life. And so when I think about, even if we could attain or help Jacob attain even just a portion of those things that are in that middle column, you're starting to build a life worth living that's going to further strengthen Jacob's life. So, once again, it's that when we talked about with the strengths assessment, it's not so much that we now have to feel that, oh gosh, we have to have these things, within the next month. And it's probably not going to, those things aren't going to happen. It also doesn't mean that we've not at this point really talked about what barriers keep Jacob from doing those, which we actually talked about in a few sessions before. But by identifying those is that you see the things that Jacob is still looking for, and so one answer to your question is that if these things are desired in the middle, the last thing that we want to do is start to bring those into the mental health system. So, an example might be the fact that he likes art. If our first response is that we have an art group within the mental health center, that could potentially draw him much more into the system, rather than first of all thinking about where could he do art within the community where anybody else in our community would. Any questions just about the strength assessment or any just reaction from that?
Okay, again, I'm going to keep my eye on folks who raise their hand or submit a written question.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and keep going, and if some of those questions pop in, would love to see those.
Okay, we'll do.
Here's one of Jacob's notes. And this may be a way to kind of get inside of it. And since we've been looking at some documentation for each of the case examples that we've done in the webinars, I thought it might be good to show you some of the conscious thinking about anchors and niches on the part of Jacob's case manager. So, Jacob at this point in time here had been in his apartment for a while, but now the focus was turning to helping him manage distressing thoughts and anxiety within that apartment. So at this point in time, his stability within his apartment was very fragile. So helping him build on his art to strengthen that anchor, as well as develop new anchors, was really critical to Jacob's ultimate success. So this is where you kind of take this in relation to, back to the strengths assessment, is that, this conscious thinking of is that, well, we'll take whatever we can get where Jacob's motivations. He was extremely highly motivated to have this apartment with Jeffrey, and so a lot of focus went into that. But then when we started really looking at, in a sense, some of the things that were actually, barriers to him being able to keep an apartment, definitely his sometimes isolating, the anxiety he experienced and stuff. And so what we're now trying to do is that how can we either broaden him to things that are already exist in the community, or even build on things that are already strengths for him. Art was actually a great example because it was really part of the social capital that you could say that Jacob had. In some ways is that you can be working with any person, and it can seem like, that they don't have that much, but, and Jacob was one of those individuals. And there's lots of areas that people's lives that sometimes they really don't feel a lot of competence. But in Jacob's case, his art was an area of competence. So it's leveraging that to help him inhabit other niches that actually end up being strong for him. So how do we keep ourselves out of the entrapping niche? And I want to kind of go back to that question that was posed right before I went into the strengths assessment. First I think identifying and building on the natural anchors that people possess and the niches they occupy. You know, don't be too quick to pull aspects of people's lives into the mental health system. You know, and when doing those strengths assessments, I think it's important really to understand how these things work for the person. So not only just the anchors, I mean the niches, how they perceive them, the active ingredients that they offer. And then when we think about, you know, when people, you know, come up with a goal that has some meaning and passion, you know, I think one of the first things is always is that how does anyone in our community go about achieving a similar goal? So not thinking about, you know, where does a person with mental illness go to do that? Where does anybody in our community to go? So it's identifying naturally occurring resources, which I think are extremely important, but it's this concept of working outward inward. And when we get to group supervision, you're going to see a little bit more of that kind of come to life, because sometimes for people, it's not so much, you know, that a person has a goal and we come up with one idea and we say, let's go out and try it. You know, how do we slow ourselves down to really kind of think about trying to find this perfect niche? What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, I want to go ahead a little bit further on this. You know, some of this I was going to talk about in here was just about, you know, why use these naturally occurring resources, and I think they probably are pretty obvious to you all. You know, while people may, you know, receive things that are of help to them and stability within mental health systems, you know, naturally occurring resources, I mean, are those things that really are going to help a person take off in their life. That's where the opportunities are. You know, if we think about the services and stuff that we have, there are limitations. There are, you know, there's only so much that we can extend outside of a highly defined box of our role and what we can do. So they generate these highly individualized supports that offer a sense of fit for people, and they're promoting participation rather than things that are artificially segregated environments. There's not many of us that really kind of were in our adolescent years and we're thinking about, you know, I would like to be a mental health client. I would like to do this within a mental health system. I mean, with all things being equal, people would rather do things, in a sense, in natural environments and with people who are not paid to, in a sense, be with those. So we're looking for those natural relationships that could eventually turn into long-term supports and foster this hope and recovery rather than illness management. What I want to do is I want to go to the group supervision part of this, because, you know, there's one part that there are some clients, and I wish this was true of every person, that, you know, they come into a mental health system and you do a strengths assessment with them. You get excited about things that are important to them. They see the importance of it. You identify a goal and you go out there and you use your personal recovery plan and you help them. It usually just doesn't happen very much like that. Usually for a lot of people that we work with, there are significant barriers for them just going out and using naturally occurring resources. And so we need to really think about how do we do things that are building off people's competencies rather than just doing any type of intervention to help a person, in a sense, become acclimated to their environment. So group supervision is a part of the strengths model, which is really to help workers on a team when they're stuck. You know, and that point of stuckness can be actually any point in time, you know, whether it's just trying to engage with somebody or the fact that we may have a specific goal and we're trying to think about how to, in a sense, increase options or ways of going about helping a person achieve a certain goal. But there's lots of things about group supervision, and you're going to see an actual group supervision here in just a bit. But group supervision is a little bit twist on, you know, typical team meetings that we have. And I don't know how your team meetings go in your agencies. You know, I see sometimes really good meetings, but I see a lot of them where they almost drain you more than they actually help you. And, you know, you hear people talk about clients, and it's sometimes more talking about war stories and talking about how do we help people achieve things. sometimes we're only really, hitting, like, really 2-minute, 3-minute blips of clients. And usually we're talking about the problems that happen, not necessarily celebrating things and thinking about how to build on things. So group supervision, or strengths-based group supervision, is a place I think is the biggest respite then for, like, say, a case manager and a case management team to provide support and affirmation in doing this type of work, generating lots of ideas and generating lots of learning. So what you're going to see, I'm not going to go through the research on here right now, but the nuts and bolts of it is that it's a meeting that occurs once a week, 90 minutes to 2 hours, and only probably about 2 to 3 client presentations will occur during this. So they'll be very highly specific, very individualized, but it creates a lot of learning for people to kind of think about how to do this work. It really kind of takes it to a very practical application. So you have a small team of practitioners who are using the tools, and what you're going to see on this is that the tools will come into play when doing the supervision, and very importantly, it's a place free of distraction where people are not like coming in and out for calls. They're really focused on their team and helping them. So there's a 6-step process to this, and I'm not going to show the presentation that I'm going to show you actually lasts probably about 35 minutes, but I'm only going to show you a small part of it, but I want to make sure that you see each of the steps that are up here. But the first step in this process is distributing the person's strengths assessment. And I've always felt that, or at least what I've had in my organizational work, is that I really don't want to talk about a client unless we have access to that person's strengths assessment. Because usually what happens is that you come out with a problem, but you come up with lots of times generic solutions, things that you might actually use for lots of different clients. But those ideas aren't necessarily highly individualized for that person. People will ask me, like, Rick, well, how do you work with people with borderline personality disorder? How do you work with people with addictions? And sometimes my answer is just, I don't know how to work with those individuals. But if you tell me about a person who cuts on herself, who has desires and aspirations to do certain things, and these are very unique supports, talents, or skills, then it's a lot easier for me to say, here's how I could give you ideas of how to help this particular person. So the strengths assessment, also starts from the point of what do we have to work with. So rather than just being introduced by just the problem that the person's experienced, let's start also with what do we have to work with in terms of moving forward. The second step on this is stating the client's goal and the help that that worker needs. The goal isn't what's on the treatment plan. What it is that what is this person passionate about? And whether it's the person's goal is to get a girlfriend, the person's goal is to get their own apartment, the person's goal is to get a job working with animals. It doesn't matter, and at this point, it doesn't even matter if it's a medically necessary goal. This isn't really about necessarily just developing the treatment plan. This is really about what is the lens that this person's looking for through, no matter what they're doing. And then specifically at the worker asking or telling the group what they need help with. What you don't want to do is get ideas about, how to cure every aspect of this person's life. You may have a person that says, I don't need help, finding resources for an apartment, and I don't need help in this area over here, but I really want to know, how do I help this person be able to better manage voices so that they can actually take a bus across town to do something that I know that they really enjoy. So in step 3 of this, the presenting case manager will do just a real quick, where they're at with the person, what's been tried. This really isn't the time to, go back to when the person was 5 years old, or, really digging up everything about this person, but what's really relevant to what you're asking help with in that client's goals. And then we're gonna go with everybody with the strengths assessment is to ask questions of clarification. What do you need to know about this person to be able to give out good brainstorming suggestions? And those questions aren't just like, what's the person's diagnosis? I mean, we're really talking about how do we start getting to the essence of who that person is. Questions like, why does this person want this so much? What is the reason a person wants to work? Those kinds of things. And then we go into brainstorming, which can last about maybe 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And if you've done this well, you'll get very highly individualized brainstorming ideas for that person to try. And what you're going to see also in this tape is that when the person who's made the case presentation is ready to get suggestions, they have to be quiet. They can't talk anymore because what we don't want to do is get people yes-butting everything. We want them to really listen, absorb, because one of the things that happens in group supervision is not necessarily just the collection of ideas and strategies, but we're also looking for shifts. How do you help a person better align with a person on a goal? So there's lots of different kinds of situations that you could present for strengths-based group supervision. This is not the time for crises. Crises have its own place, and I'd rather not wait until group supervision on Thursday to talk about a crisis. Let's take care of some of those things right now. But most of the things that you would present would be a person you're working with who's having difficulty achieving or making progress towards a recovery-oriented goal. The person has said they wanted to work, but we can't seem to make any progress. The person says that, Jacob wants to get an apartment with Jeffrey, but he's having difficulty being able to do it. Or even that there's difficulty engaging or developing a relationship, where it's like, I'm not even sure what the goal this person has, but I do know these few things about them. Here's their strengths assessment. Could I get some ideas about how to better engage with this person or align with them around a goal or get to a goal? So helping a person identify a goal, align around a goal, where you've thought of some ideas but you're looking for multiple options, promoting choice and autonomy. It's another way to kind of keep people out of entrapping niches, that there's multiple ways. And a lot of it is just any situation where your group can benefit. No matter who. This is why it's okay to only do 2 or 3 presentations, because if you stay attuned to it, that any group presentation is actually going to benefit everybody on the team. Because if you're not working with that person, you will be working with a person like that person at some point. Okay, so I'm going to shift over to show the video. This is going to be a very tricky thing that we've tried to test several times over the last couple of weeks. But what I'm going to do is I have this video on a different system, and I'm going to call in and we're going to go through the phone. So Karen, I'll let you talk to everybody and then I'll go get that set up, okay?
Very good. So what we're calling this right now is a commercial break. I'm going to move you over right now to looking at the SurveyMonkey that we're going to share with you after this call. We would like you to go ahead and complete the SurveyMonkey, the strength scale, and put your scores into the SurveyMonkey. So you should be seeing right now the web-based SurveyMonkey that has the strengths model practice orientation scale recreated within it. We would like you to submit your information. It's absolutely okay to be anonymous. We don't need to know who you are. We're just trying to learn more about where you all stand in terms of adopting or having a history of using some of these practices versus where you might want to go. So you'll see in the SurveyMonkey that we want you to indicate your first and last name if you choose, kind of organization you're with, what kind of role that you have, what's your title or role, what kind of program you're part of, and then if you're submitting as an individual, because you can go ahead and score yourself or you can score as a team, and then within each component indicate what level you've scored, and then within that score what numeric gradation that you're giving yourself. So you'll recognize these if you've completed the scale using the Word form that we sent you. It translates directly into this SurveyMonkey, and it allows us where you stand and where you like to go. So this is pretty straightforward, easy data entry. Once you're done, you just submit, and then we've got the score, and we can accumulate and learn some things that we will use then in the final session of this web series, which is 1 month from now. So Rick, I'm going to make you the presenter now, and you can unmute yourself when you're ready. And we do want to remind you folks, this is not the most elegant transmission of this video. You have the link to it, and we strongly recommend that after you take a look at Rick's daughters, his gorgeous daughters, that on your own you go ahead and take a look at this video because it's a very rich learning opportunity. So Rick, all yours.
Okay, so first of all, can you hear my voice?
Yes, we can. Not as well as before, but you're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, that's okay. And you can see the video right now on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
Everyone, if you want to go ahead and pass those out, and you can go ahead and start the presentation whenever you're ready.
Well, while as you're coming around, as you know, Rick, we kind of talked about this presentation because I needed a little bit of help with figuring out exactly what I wanted from the group. So, strength assessment is coming around right now for Anna. She's somebody I've worked with for about 6 months.
And you want to go ahead and start off just with what the client's goal is, and kind of what you're wanting from the group.
Okay. So Anna's long-term goal is to go back to work. But right now, she really wants to learn or explore alternative strategies to help her manage her depression, in addition to taking medication. So she's looking for other things to do besides just taking medications for her depression. And she also has been, her voices have been a lot worse recently. So what I want help with from the team is that she talks to me a lot about how much she used to love to work and how she wants to go back to work, but she feels like her symptoms are too bad right now. So I want ideas about what she wants, alternate strategies for managing depression and voices, so that she can go back to work eventually.
Okay, that's good, Allie. So why don't you just give us, just in a few sentences, kind of an overview of the situation, what things that you tried right now, so that we can kind of build on that in our brainstorming.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess.
Okay, so I'm gonna skip past that part. What Allie does really just kind of describe where she's at with the person, and I'm gonna start going right into when we start talking, doing the questions of clarification.
Getting most of the stuff.
Okay, good. That's a good setup for the team. So I can get everyone to kind of focus in on the strength assessment. Let's ask some questions of Allie to kind of better understand Anna, so that we can know more about just what she thinks about her goal, and start to know a little bit more about her strengths, and be able to generate some really good suggestions for Allie then.
Are there things in the past that she's done to manage her symptoms? Not that aren't medication. I don't think she's ever intentionally done anything like that. I mean, she's really only experienced depression and voices for the last couple of years. And prior to that, she was, you know, she ran her own business, and she really wasn't struggling with a lot. So I think she's really open to maybe looking back and see like things that she used to do in the past that she liked that maybe we could pull forward. And we've had some of that conversation, but yeah.
Do you know what kind of nature books she likes?
Mostly like gardening books, landscaping, gardening. It says she wants to learn how to cook healthy foods.
I just want to stop for a second. I don't know, Karen, if you had said this before, but they should all have copies of Anna's strength assessment that they can look at while we're doing this.
Yes, thank you. I forgot to remind folks, but we did include in the handouts Anna's strength assessment, so you can review that and sort of think about it as if you were at the table with everybody.
Are there more specifics around that? Is it like any kind of food? Is it something more specific? Well, I think right now her cooking is the one way she feels like she's contributing to the household. Okay. And she said she wants to learn how to cook Indian food and also just in general more healthy foods. So I don't know anymore really about why that's a goal for her.
Allie, you mentioned that she wants to learn these strategies in addition to taking medications. Can you tell us a little bit about like how her medications are helping her, and maybe where she thinks that they're not being helpful enough and something else is needed?
Well, the side effects from on the antipsychotic medication that she takes for her voices. It just got to the point where they were pretty unbearable for her. And so we met together with her psychiatrist and kind of decided that maybe she was getting the maximum benefit out of that medicine and that she was going to have to work on other strategies for managing voices. The depression, the antidepressants that she's taken, she doesn't seem to have as much she doesn't seem to have as many concerns about, although I still experience her as being really pretty depressed. I say that. Maybe her inability to get out of the apartment, maybe it's due more to the voices. I don't know.
Okay.
But she does, to me, still seem quite depressed as well.
Are the voices telling her things about what will happen if she leaves the apartment?
I don't know. That's a good question.
And you mentioned that she used to hang out with a friend named April on the weekends and play cards and things like that. Does she have other supports what was that like for her? Do you know?
She really lights up when she talks about how she used to do that. I mean, I think it was like an every Friday night thing. That's what they did together.
Okay, I'm now going to go ahead and, questions went on for about another maybe 5 to 7 minutes or so, and so now I'll go into the brainstorming part of it.
Question, and I'm not sure. I would guess that most of it's been after, but it'd still be interesting to ask her, obviously.
Yeah, but there's still stress in a job.
Yeah, how does she manage that? Mm-hmm. That's a great question.
Any last questions? Okay, let's go ahead and move into brainstorming. So at this point now, Allie, you need to not talk anymore. Take out a piece of paper and write down every suggestion that we have. So at this point, no more questions. If you want Allie to try something, just tell her to try it.
And I'll think about it.
And Allie will think about it.
Well, I'm thinking that, since she checks things out for free from the library, maybe they would have workout videos there, and so she could exercise without actually leaving the house, and maybe that would get her started.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. I wonder if we're even going on YouTube and looking up some yoga, because that could combine exercise and meditation. And then maybe once she develops a level of comfort, the two of you could walk to a nearby yoga studio or go to the Y because they offer yoga classes. So it's kind of a step-by-step process.
It might be nice to get a better understanding of her experience of anxiety. So if you kind of took a session where you're actually using a learning opportunity of starting from the house, that you're going to go somewhere where you can successfully go out, and just start to have her give you feedback of what she's feeling, if she feels a fear, anything, just so that you can kind of start to label things out, and then you could kind of start to think about the different strategies about how they might help you prevent that or deal with that.
Yeah, you could do a recovery goal plan around having her set a goal in that area and taking small steps towards that so she could actually see she's making progress overcoming the voices.
Think about earplugs at night. I don't know if she's tried that. That might be help her sleep.
I think it'd be cool too if you wanted to jump on the school social work website or something. Maybe she'd be interested in doing online classes or something so she could stay at home if she's interested in that at all, or even just kind of seeing what's available.
I also thought it was cool since she lights up when she talks about her friend around April, and maybe one of the times when you're out walking around, maybe since you're already really good at helping her do the first initial hump, maybe you could help her get all the way to April's house for some weekend or something,
Or invite April.
Okay, so the brainstorming goes on, and then just this last part up here is just Allie now kind of responds back of what she's heard. So
I really like that idea because it's something she's already bought into versus something that maybe we'd have to convince her for. That's good. Let me go ahead and stop for just a second. And Allie, have you had any new ideas?
Oh yeah, I've got many new ideas.
Okay. I mean, we could probably come up with a bunch more. But I think what I'd like to do is just go ahead and see what you're hearing right now. Are there some ideas that you want to try? and then always you can get with team members and even add more things to that at any point. So tell me a little bit about what looks good to you, and based on that, what do you think the next steps might be?
Well, I'll get specific with my ideas, but Anna's open enough that I could actually take this entire list out and just sit down and see what resonates with her. So that is definitely something that I will do. Things that really stand out to me are a lot of the different strategies around managing voices. Like, I've not talked to her about all the vocal stuff, and I love the idea of maybe tying that into some Native American chants if she's interested in that, and definitely hooking her up with a voice hero support group since she's so into social networking already. So that's
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the other audio source, and so maybe we could see if there's any just questions or reactions just from of seeing that.
Okay, Rick, you can now move to your other visual display.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, so questions from folks. Realize that the sound and the visual didn't always stay in sync, but hopefully you got the spirit of a very fun and super rich, constructive group supervision process. Okay, Rick, no questions have come in yet, but folks may be typing.
Okay.
And there was a previous question that we didn't quite get to. Let me offer that up now, because maybe you can weave in some group supervision reference to this. But the question came in: how do you guide clients who want to continually revisit the past, e.g. when they were 5 years old, when it was clearly traumatizing and not helpful to revisit? And this was Leanne O'Neill. And Leanne, I'll find you in the list and take you off mute.
You know, that's that's so hard to answer, I think, you know, without really kind of understanding the specifics of that particular person. You know, I always come back to lots of questions about is that, you know, what are we trying to accomplish, and, you know, why. I probably have more questions than I have answers to, but it's why does that person want to keep revisiting it? What's the driving it on that? What keeps the person from thinking about things moving forward? So do I think it's necessary? It's bad to go back? Not necessarily. You know, but I see that actually sometimes being counterproductive for lots of people. I think a lot of it is that of kind of knowing that for some people they need to be able to process certain things, and for some people it's permission that they don't necessarily have to resolve everything before they start to move on with their life. And but I think a lot of that is really having to sit down and really having to have a very in-depth discussion about where do you want to go. And I think that starts to guide it. And then you'd really have to see about, you know, who is that person, their personality, and how they're responding to things anyway. That's hard to answer.
One question or response came in from Anna Krakamo. I have participated in one of these group supervision. I was able to expand my view of resources, but it was more helpful when I shared info with the client and helped him to identify meaningful resources, ideas, and niches.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback on that. You know, group supervision helped me a lot because I didn't have to necessarily possess all the answers. You know, as long as I was the person who was trying to more elicit what a person wanted that was meaningful and important, you know, and even if I had a few ideas, it was always so nice to say, you know, let me go back to my team and let's just see what kind of ideas and stuff that we may have. Really broadening people's minds is that the fact that there are multiple paths to goal achievement. You know, some people aren't going to want a lot of choice. They'd rather you make the decisions on there, and we go back to the shared decision making. But I found for the most part is that people do appreciate that kind of thought that's kind of given into it, because it's like, you know, I want to try to help you be able to do this, but which is the best fit for you? We're not talking about it here in these sessions here, but there's another tool that we use where we look at things that a person may present and look at the pros and cons of each from that person's perspective. So what would it take then actually to be able to move forward with that particular route? And sometimes giving people permission just to explore things, even if they've never tried it.
Anna, any other thoughts you have? I've taken you off mute. Okay, I think maybe you've answered her question. So go ahead, Rick, and carry on. That was the last of our questions so far.
Okay, just a last things. You have access to the entire group supervision video if you want to watch the whole thing. There's other resources that we can give you as far as knowing how to conduct the group supervision. Any of you that have the 3rd edition of the Strengths Model book, there's lots of stuff inside there, not only about how to do strengths assessments and personal recovery plans, but actually how to conduct group supervision and what that looks like. But it doesn't mean that what you're doing is not working. It's also to, in a sense, give you more options as practice tools, especially as we're trying to do something that sometimes can be heroic for some people with moving beyond our systems of care, and group supervision plays a very valued role for all of us to start thinking about that. But to really, so if you want to do something like this, is that just evaluate your own meetings. Is the energy deflating, or is it something that's increasing to it that feels connected to the mission that we're trying to do? Are your supervision sessions venting sessions, or are they really producing useful strategies? Does it feel like a meeting, or does it feel like a learning session? And probably the ultimate test is it actually helping people move forward in their recovery? And what we do a lot of times in the sites after they've been doing lots of group supervision sessions is really going back and seeing who it's making a difference for. How's it working? So there's lots of things that's needed to make this work. One is a very obnoxious supervisor who's recovery oriented. You do really need this, and part of it is that there's reasons why we have those steps, and I tend to be very flexible in my practice, but I get very rigid about leading group supervision because it works. And if people are coming there because they need help in a certain area, you want to have something that's actually going to lead to the actual result. And that's why that question to Allie at the very end was, did you get some useful ideas? And by her saying that yes and get excited, she has something else to go back out there with. That tells you that it's working for her. You have to have the strength assessments there for, like I just said. You have to be able to have time to do the meetings. And a last one there is just a willingness to remove spirit-breaking language. If you watch that whole tape, there's you could have almost thought of Anna as, it could have very well have been somebody's relative, not just a client of the system. So why, how does this thing with group supervision fit into like anchors and niches? For me is that, we all have a collective responsibility for the people that we serve. We talk so much in terms of like, this is my client and our caseload, but I always think about it is that, you happen to be the person who's assigned at this particular time to work with this person. You may be the right person, you may not necessarily be the right person to advance that person's recovery, but what group supervision does is really it brings us all into that. If you're not at that table and you're not kind of getting invested into the story of Anna, then you're not investing yourself as part of that team. So we also have a collective responsibility to help each other when we're stuck and build skills. So a collective responsibility to help each other learn. And when you're setting a noble vision of things like recovery and helping people to develop anchors within niches that are outside, it's going to take that curiosity, the creativity of a group to advance that. So that's why I see that as a very powerful tool that allows us to keep moving in this direction. So that's all I had, Karen.
Okay, we did have one question from Vince Ramos. He said, looking back can sometimes be beneficial as they compare where they are versus where they, to see how much they have progressed.
Right.
So Vince, I'll take you off of mute if you want to add anything to that or further explore this idea.
Yes, because sometimes looking back, it shows you how traumatic your life was, but when you start looking forward, you go, well, my life's not so traumatic, and I can move forward with some confidence, even though I made some mistakes here along the line, and that sort of builds up some esteem, I would say, or some fortitude to move forward.
Yeah, no, I love that you said that, and that's why it kind of comes back to my question of, what is the purpose of doing something? What do you hope it will attain? And, if I had a person that was saying that, I feel like I'm moving through the messiness of life, but I'm not getting anywhere, I'm not making any progress, you're right, that comparative kind of thing is that, it's amazing that you went from this point in time where you were when you were at this point in your life to where you're at now, and trying to understand, in a sense, what's happened during that time. And you're right, that's when you think about a strength assessment, even people sometimes that don't really realize that they have anything to move forward with can sometimes realize that, wow, it's like I've really accumulated a lot in my life that I have to able to go forward. So yeah, there is definitely value to those things. It's just always questioning the purpose.
Okay, so Rick, I don't see any more questions coming through at the moment.
Okay.
So as usual, one of the next steps that we recommend is to try it. The group supervision process is a fairly straightforward one to carry out. I think you've probably got enough instructions to give it a go, figure out how you can begin to make it work in your organization. Very powerful, so strongly recommend you try it, and we'd love to hear from you next call, our final call to cover it. So that's one of your next steps. I'm going to just remind one last time what the other is to use this scale, our 5-item scale. Best case scenario, do it as an individual, then come together as a team and come up with, translate your individual scores into a team score. If you're not participating in this as a team, it's still very valuable for you to use it as an individual and introduce it into the SurveyMonkey, which we will send to you at the conclusion of this call. So the SurveyMonkey that I showed you during our commercial break will be available to you, and it's very easy to get your data in. And again, you can do it anonymously. We don't need to know your name. We just want to know more about what's happening out there. Next slide. So keep going. Just a quick preview of our final webinar. We're going to step back and take an even bigger picture view of all the things that we've been sharing. We'll take a look at the Strengths Practice Orientation Scale findings and discuss that. We'll look at organizational structures and how they contribute to recovery, organizational roles and how those roles, from leaders to managers to supervisors to the folks who provide first-hand service, how all those contribute to recovery. We're going to emphasize the importance of the supervisor to the strengths model practice. I think that's a theme you've heard throughout these series. We'll talk about teamwork, and finally we'll really emphasize that a big part of what systems do is hold the hope for those that we serve. So we can, when folks don't have hope, we hold it for them and build it for them. So that's what we'll be covering in our very final session. We sure appreciate everybody listening in on this. Please do complete the evaluation at the end. We want to continue to learn how to make this useful to you. Have a great day, and we look forward to speaking with you again in a month. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.